Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Shannon Scott with Grave Talks. And shocking, you find me in another cemetery. In this case, we're in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at what used to be called the Old College Cemetery for a long time, now just called the Old Chapel Hill Cemetery. And beautiful, kind of pioneer vibing cemetery in the middle of a college campus, right? At Chapel Hill. And great old antique walls from the 1830s with a lot of stones piled up from the area, which kind of give it that old kind of Scottish, English, Irish look. And certainly the area mix of that. And Chapel Hill was kind of named, or the namesake for a chapel that was founded at some crossroads in the area in the 1750s. And then a land grant after the university, or rather the college, was founded, is that 1789? Somewhere around there anyway. I'm not going to have that exactly right. But there was a land grant here given, and then 1798, we find the first burial with George Clark, who is here kind of at the end of this little section. And his slab is pretty much illegible. It has that kind of Dutch style gambreled rooftop, which always reminds me of the shape of, let's say, someone's head with some shoulders, but at the same time, definitely that architectural inspiration from the Dutch, who were, a lot of the carvers for headstones, and of course Freemasons. And we see, the obelisk across the cemetery, the adopted symbol of the Masons. And right here we have the Philanthropic Society kind of group. I'm sorry, this is not the Philanthropic. Hey, those guys are over there. But the two groups that first had sections here were the Philanthropic Society and the Dialectic Society. And, you find all these great names out here in America. And, in many ways, these are the movers, the shakers, the producers. But you're also kind of reminded of the fact that they're the gatekeepers. Many did good things within these organizations for the public, the average people, the new society of America. But at the same time, it's that kind of reminds a little bit of the pyramid scheme of the world too, and the way wealth is distributed or oriented, or how it happens. And it kind of makes you wonder a little bit too about the control grid. But nonetheless, beautiful monuments here in the Philanthropic Society section. And there's one over here that's got a powerful, other than being called a monument of brotherly love, has a really powerful inscription. Our life on earth is a school, death calls us home. Eternity shall infinitely expand our powers to find the noblest exercise in heaven. Wow, that's just potent. Whoever came up with that, genius. And we see different styles here too. We've got the tabletop entablature, grave, which is very, meeting table, Last Supper, communion table, body preparation table. It's a lot of different things. A lot of those legs collapse over time, which is why you see many of those on the ground. But there are 1,700 burials here, and they did some LIDAR over time as well to find missing graves, because the poor people that eventually got buried here among the elite often got just simple stones, which can be random, or they can signify the graves of poorer people. And I don't doubt that some of those got placed into walls as, repair. But I just think that's an interesting footnote in the cemetery history, is that some of these stones like this weren't just here, but became headstones themselves. But there were two sections outfitted for the African American population, which we'll cruise around to in a little bit. But a part of just being out here is to take you along for the ride and just sort of, see what we can see together. So hope you don't mind tagging along for that. You can kind of get a sense that there was a lot of investment here at one time. It's now owned or controlled by Chapel Hill, the college or the university. A lot of masonry went into these older sections. Although I think when they did the rock walls in the 1830s, this was just meant to be a little more country style random, which has its own appeal, or maybe there was a little masonry art to them, hard to say, but just love that visual across the cemetery landscape. It was really, really beautiful. We'll take a little dip into the Dialectic Society plot, which, by the way, never heard of that society, and also find it a little suspect. When I think about the dialectic, I think about kind of the duplicity of secret societies and fraternal orders, the social engineers kind of, running one narrative for themselves and all the institutions, and then one for the main populace, which I think, resonates more than ever now among the populace. So not trying to throw shade at the Dialectic Society, but I can never help offending people when I'm walking around in the cemetery. Too bad! But yeah, beautiful ironwork here, 1795. The ironwork's probably a little later. Looks like it's missing what I would probably see as a classic, maybe a tree. There might have been an angel in flight with its kind of classic face buried in its forearm to show mourning while it's in flight. It's hard to say what was here, but it does remind of some of those classic fences you see around, which, always crowned by the urns with a little bit of that tulip flame, eternal flame style. Again, we see an urn repeated there at the top of this obelisk. Let's see. The modesty, industry, and decorum of his youth gave promise of a useful and honorable manhood. Again, got to give it to these societies. They always had great inscriptions. The one that really stood out to me, which looks like it's for a gentleman named Lewis Bowen Hollis, but it's kind of illegible. He died in 1843 at 22 years of age, but someone carved this beautiful Oasis scene, which includes, kind of your classic, I'm going to call it Moorish style temple, your desert palm trees. There's even a lion fountaining water out of its mouth. An amazingly carved broken urn where the handle is shattered away from the spout. The spout and the neck have broken away from the base. And then we have the fountain here where the rope is kind of, there's a handle. It's hard to see, but there's very much a distinct well here with kind of the rope there, but no bucket. Presumably this could have been the bucket, which is also broken. Hard to say, but what a carving. God. I wish it were a little more legible. I'd love to share that. So, nonetheless, you can hear the church bells nearby. There's some young guys playing rugby across the way in a little stadium environment, so it feels very much college campus. But to think about how this used to really orient and feel. Little groundhog hole, so that's classic. You can't have an old graveyard or an old cemetery without some groundhog holes. I'm going to step over the wall here kind of cautiously. This plot is fairly buried. There's not much legible here. Again, I think at one point the college had it. It went back into the community, and then the college finally took it over again in, I can't remember if it was the late 19th century, early 20th, but saw a beautiful iron gate over here with this great ornamental design. Wanted to show it to you. So we have what is really a kind of a crown at the very top, although you could almost say that stylistically it's like Christ with his arms open. We have very much some vining, almost angel figures that are figurative there. Obviously some fluting flowers that are very triumphant looking, kind of trumpet-like. The heart shape, which is just gorgeous. And then the chain here, which is always about the anchor and one's faith. Also the chain of connection to family and the township and also one's faith. And then a great, looks like eagle face here. It's hard to say, there's some lichens on it. Looks like another heart shape with some wings to show ascension. That's just a great gate. You know, maybe late 19th century, could be early 20th, but hard to say. As we kind of cross in the direction of the African American sections, which rather extensive. I mean, looks like they represent about a third of the cemetery. They did a lot of LiDAR over here to find the unknown graves. You find a lot of those random stones that we kind of mentioned. But there's a cenotaph here for America's first published African American, is how he is known. He was the poet born not too far outside of Chapel Hill, George Moses Horton. And he writes, "Thus we like birds retreat to groves and hide from every eye. Our slumbering dust will rise and meet its morning in the sky." And it's there at the bottom. "In honor of those buried here in unmarked graves, September 18, 2016. So relatively new. Nothing on the back. But what is interesting is that Moses, the poet, he was a part of the Liberian experiment. And for his prolificness as a poet in America, he basically vanishes into Liberia. And of course, that was a part of, you don't really hear much about it anymore. It's a fascinating social experiment, not unlike maybe an Israel idea, but, you know, during Abraham Lincoln's time, I mean, a part of his effort was an attempt to return slaves to their African home, give, I think the United States approved $2 million for the establishment of Liberia. And so our poet there decides to become a part of that experiment, and he goes over there and vanishes into oblivion. So if I understand his history correctly, no one knows exactly what happened to him. Isn't that interesting? Just vanished. That'd be a great TV project, I think, for somebody. So, you know, just free ideas. I'm full of them. But we're going to take another kind of cross-section walk across the cemetery here in Chapel Hill. We really got one grave that is a modern grave to end on out here. And many of you will recognize the name, the person, and honestly, somebody that inspired me in my childhood and later adulthood as a storyteller. And not without controversy, for sure, but a lot of you will recollect or have memory of Charles Kuralt. On the Road with Charles Kuralt. He just had that slow kind of storyteller drawl, didn't he? I mean, in today's haste of talking heads really talking fast on the news and just trying to spew out endless babble of information, I was never drawn to that. Thank God I didn't grow up in that age, you know. It's like I watch kids today watching YouTube and, you know, shows that are designed for kids by these adults just cashing in, and it's just so fast. I'm like, how do their brains even take a breather? Which, you know, I also wonder the intention around that. But as a kid, I was really taken in with these people that took their time. They took their time to share ideas and relate and communicate. It was like even now, some of you who follow me know, I'd much rather have a conversation with you that feels natural and just like two people talking, not trying to overly sell something or, just make it seem so enigmatic that you don't have time to think about it for yourself. That's just not me. I'd much rather feel relatable to you. And I think that's the type of storytellers that I always was drawn to within my family unit, at the family reunions. Who was that person? That person very much. Or just, I guess my heroes, conscious and unconscious. And Charles Kuralt was one of them. I loved On the Road with Charles Kuralt. As much as I could catch that show as a kid, I would. And here is the final resting place. This is where you could say the story ends for the storyteller Charles Kuralt with his wife, Petite. Certainly not, I wouldn't think Petey, but Petite Baird Kuralt. That's a beautiful name. She died a couple years after him in 1999. He was born in 1934, died in 1997. And apparently heart failure, and he was a real raconteur. I think that's the funny thing about Charles Kuralt, is that he was sort of sold to us as like, the honest Christian guy next door. And I'm sure he really was in a lot of ways, but he was also a party guy. I mean, he smoked, he drank, he was, not trying to speak ill of the dead, but he definitely was a carouser. I mean, hey, On the Road with Charles Kuralt, more like On the Carousing Path with Charles Kuralt. Sorry, couldn't resist. But anyway, classic storyteller, one of America's most famous. I mean, I think about, the Mark Twains and just great storytellers, across the board. And Kuralt had one of those voices that just everyone stopped to listen to. So, I think it's kind of cool to show up here today and sort of meet my hero, at least in the Chapel Hill graveyard. Well, guys, a lot of fun. Thanks for tagging along yet again. And we are building something here, one brick at a time. So I don't build things with plastic. I don't build things with veneer. Kind of a naturalist in my approach to the way I build things. So you guys are part of that vision and dream. And please know that just by hanging out here and listening to me for a while, you're part of the stone building that I'm kind of aiming for. And so thank you for just tagging along. It means a lot. So I hope you'll stay around and share with others. And when you're in that Savannah area, come see me. Check me out at shannonscotttours.com for some of my private engagements. But yeah, thanks for your support, guys.